The integrated mind, a grand unified theory of mental health, resilience, and societal well-being. Introduction. The modern imperative to understand the mind-mental health today stands at the intersection of a crisis and a revolution. On one hand, data points to an anxious generation, escalating rates of burnout, and profound societal disconnection. On the other, neuroscience, psychology, and trauma studies are rapidly dismantling simplistic models of mental illness, replacing them with a complex, integrated understanding that links biology, biography, and culture. The pursuit is no longer merely to treat symptoms, but to achieve psychological quality, a deep, authentic state of well-being that is resilient to the inevitable challenges of modern existence. This extensive deep dive synthesizes the groundbreaking work of leading thinkers, from clinicians and neuroscientists to cultural critics and self-help pioneers. It is a journey that moves from the architecture of trauma in the body to the societal structures that drive depression, from the mechanics of worrying to the profound impact of intentional self-discipline and emotional literacy. The goal is to articulate an integrated theory of the mind, drawing on the wisdom contained within the vast canon of contemporary psychological thought. The embodied architecture of trauma and the brain's capacity for change. The most profound shift in contemporary mental health understanding comes from the realization that psychological distress is often a physiological response to overwhelming experience. Trauma is not merely a memory, it is a fundamental alteration of the body's wiring for safety. Trauma, the body, and the body keeps the score. Bessel. Van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score stands as the definitive text on how trauma is literally embodied. His work shifted the clinical focus from talk therapy alone to a tripartite approach: brain, mind, and body. The neurobiological signature of fear. Trauma hijacks the brain's alarm system, leading to a persistent state of hyperarousal. The limbic system, particularly the amygdala, the emotional sentinel, becomes overactive, while the medial prefrontal cortex, PFC, responsible for emotional regulation, reflection, and narrative, becomes underactive. This disconnect explains why traumatized individuals often feel stuck in the past, unable to integrate their experiences into a coherent, manageable life story. The language of the vagus nerve. The polyvagal theory, a cornerstone of embodied trauma work, highlights the role of the vagus nerve in regulating the autonomic nervous system. Trauma compromises the ventral vagal brake, which allows us to feel safely connected and regulated. Healing involves interventions like yoga, mindfulness, and rhythmic movement that directly engage and calm this physiological pathway, helping the body recognize that the danger is over. Dissociation and somatic flashbacks. Because the narrative capacity, PFC, is compromised during trauma, memories are often stored as raw, sensory fragments. Somatic flashbacks, physical sensations, sounds, or images. Van der Kolk champions therapies like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, that help the brain reprocess these fragments, allowing them to be integrated into a less emotionally charged narrative, thus completing the defensive action the body was unable to finish at the time of the event. The balanced brain and the science of neuroplasticity. Complementing trauma research is the work on neuroplasticity, explored by Camilla Nord in The Balanced Brain. The brain's capacity to change is the very mechanism of both mental illness and recovery. Network dysfunction. Mental illness is increasingly understood as a network dysfunction, a breakdown in the communication between key brain regions. Depression, for instance, might involve a hyperconnectivity in the default mode network, DMN, leading to excessive self-rumination, and a hypoconnectivity, with the frontal control networks needed to switch focus. The mechanism of healing. Therapy is effective precisely because it promotes neuroplasticity, whether through CBT, which creates new, healthier cognitive pathways, or through emerging therapies like those involving psychedelics, as explored in Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind. The goal is the same: to rewire the dysfunctional networks and create a more balanced, flexible system. The brain is not static. It is always capable of evolving in response to intentional input. The crisis of connection. Societal and technological drivers of distress if trauma is the internal wound. Societal toxicity is the external pressure. A powerful new thesis in mental health attributes the current epidemics of anxiety and depression not just to individual failure, but to systemic disconnection and cultural stress. A. Lost connections and the societal roots of depression. Johann Hari's Lost Connections argues compellingly that clinical depression and anxiety are often signals of unmet needs and broken connections, rather than solely a chemical imbalance. The 9 connections. Hari identifies 9 key disconnections fueling modern distress, including disconnection from meaningful work, disconnection from other people, disconnection from meaningful values, disconnection from a hopeful future, and disconnection from nature. The chemical imbalance myth. His research deconstructs the oversimplified chemical imbalance theory, which, while useful for some, has often obscured the profound role of social and psychological pain. True recovery often requires not just medication, but social prescribing, helping people reconnect to their communities, find flow in their work, and engage in meaningful social action. Be the anxious generation. And the digital rewiring. Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation provides a specific, urgent cultural critique focusing on youth mental health. He posits a direct causal link between the advent of the smartphone-based adolescence, circa 2010-2012, and the dramatic cross-national surge in anxiety, depression, and self-harm among teens. The loss of play and independence. Haidt argues for 2 core historical shifts: the overprotection of children in the real world, the decline of unsupervised play, and the underprotection of children in the virtual world, unrestricted access to social media. This created a generation that is simultaneously fragile in person and vulnerable online. The performance self. Social media forces adolescents into a perpetual state of social performance, where every aspect of life is subjected to public scrutiny, likes, and comparison. This constant, high-stakes exposure is fundamentally incompatible with healthy identity formation and developmental maturity, leading to a pervasive, chronic state of social anxiety. C. The cultural push for the comfort crisis, the modern obsession. With perpetual comfort, a theme explored by Michael Easter in The Comfort Crisis, is also a subtle antagonist to resilience, hormesis, and anti-fragility. Easter argues that humans are biologically wired for a degree of intentional discomfort. Practices like cold exposure, fasting, and long bouts of movement, rucking. These stressors, applied in manageable doses, a concept known as hormesis, build anti-fragility, the ability to grow stronger from adversity. By eliminating all physical and mental challenges, modern life inadvertently starves the nervous system of the input required to build robust mental and physical health. D. The psychology of resilience. Mindset, self-esteem, and toughness. The transition from a state of illness to a state of robust well-being requires more than damage repair. It demands the cultivation of powerful psychological strengths. A. Mindset. The New Psychology of Success and Growth. Carroll. Dweck's mindset revolutionized the understanding of personal potential. Her work is foundational to the psychology of well-being. Fixed versus growth mindset. A fixed mindset believes abilities and intelligence are static, leading to an avoidance of challenge, fear of failure, and defensive behavior. A growth mindset believes abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, fostering a love of learning, persistence in the face of setbacks, and viewing effort as the path to mastery. Implications for mental health. A growth mindset is a psychological buffer against anxiety and depression, because failure is reframed not as a statement about intrinsic worth, but as actionable information for future improvement. It is a critical component of the pursuit of psychological quality championed by theorists like C. Franklin True B. The Psychology of Self-Esteem and Personal Integrity. Nathaniel Brandon's work on self-esteem moves beyond shallow affirmations to define it as the profound conviction that one is competent to cope with the fundamental challenges of life and worthy of happiness. The pillars of self-esteem. Brandon identifies 6 crucial practices, including the practice of living consciously, mindfulness and reality orientation, the practice of self-acceptance, refusing to be in an adversarial relationship with oneself, and the practice of personal integrity, matching one's actions to one's stated values. The link to boundaries. This integrity directly links to Nedra Glover Tawwab's set boundaries. Find peace. Setting boundaries is the external manifestation of internal self-esteem. It is the act of communicating that one's time, energy, and emotional space are valuable and non-negotiable. It is an essential skill for reclaiming one's life. See 10-minute toughness and mental conditioning. Jason Selk's 10-minute toughness applies high-performance athletic psychology to everyday life, emphasizing that mental strength is a skill, not an innate trait. The power of mental preparation. Selk promotes simple daily mental conditioning drills, such as centering, a deep breath followed by a cue word to focus, and relentless solution focus, RSF. RSF is the deliberate, immediate choice to switch from dwelling on a problem to articulating 3 things you can do to fix it. This is a direct, practical intervention against the negative spirals explored in Nick Trenton's Stop Overthinking, Visualization and Mental Rehearsal. Utilizing mental rehearsal to vividly imagine successful outcomes primes the neural pathways for success and builds confidence before the actual performance. A core principle in the applied psychology of well-being. The mechanics of emotional regulation and stress completion. Significant portion of psychological quality relies on managing the constant flow of cognitive and emotional inputs, learning how to worry effectively, heal emotional wounds, and complete the stress cycle. A. The stress cycle and burnout. The core message of Amelia and Emily Nagoski's Burnout. The secret to unlocking the stress cycle is that stress is not just a mental state, but a physiological state that demands a physical conclusion. The fire and the fuel. The stressor is the trigger, a deadline, a difficult client. But the stress itself is the neurological and hormonal mobilization, cortisol, adrenaline, designed to help you fight or flee. The problem is that in modern life, we rarely fight or flee the boss. We sit at our desks, letting the stress energy accumulate. 6 ways to complete the cycle. The Nagoskis outline non-negotiable strategies for signaling safety to the nervous system and discharging the accumulated stress energy. Physical movement, deep breathing, positive social interaction, a 20-second hug, laughter, crying, and creative expression. Failing to complete the cycle is the mechanism of chronic stress and burnout. B. From worry to action. How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Dale Carnegie's classic, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, remains a foundational text for practical cognitive control, offering techniques that predate modern CBT. The Magic Formula. Carnegie's practical magic formula for worrying outlines a 3-step process. 1. Ask, what is the worst that can possibly happen? 2. Prepare to accept the worst. 3. Then calmly seek to improve upon the worst. This process takes a vague anxiety and forces it into a concrete, controllable framework, effectively limiting the time spent in the unproductive spiral of overthinking. The law of large numbers for worry. His emphasis on focusing on one day at a time and the realization that most of our worries never come true is a powerful antidote to the excessive future-tripping characteristic of anxiety. Emotional First Aid and Treating. Psychological Injuries Guy Winch's Emotional First Aid shifts the focus to the practical daily treatment of common psychological wounds, arguing that we are highly attuned to physical pain, but neglect emotional injuries like rejection, failure, and guilt. Treating rejection. Rejection does not just hurt emotionally, it activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Winch advocates for immediate treatment by challenging the inevitable self-criticism, affirming one's inherent worth, and strengthening social bonds the psychological equivalent of cleaning and bandaging a cut. Addressing rumination. Like Nick Trenton in Stop Overthinking, Winch stresses that rumination, the repetitive, unproductive dwelling on negative thoughts, is a destructive pattern. The treatment involves constructive distraction and the active redirection of thought energy to prevent the infection of the emotional wound. V. The philosophical and therapeutic quest for meaning. Ultimately, mental health is intertwined with the search for meaning, purpose, and a coherent narrative for one's life. Psychological quality requires a philosophical grounding. A therapeutic journey, and the role of philosophy, Alain de Botton, and the school of life's approach, detailed in A Therapeutic Journey, reframes therapy as a contemporary quest for wisdom and philosophical clarity. Therapy as emotional education. De Botton argues that many of our neuroses stem from an unexamined life and a lack of emotional education. Therapy is the process of learning about one's own internal contradictions, learning to tolerate uncertainty, and developing a mature, realistic view of self and others. Normalizing imperfection. A key therapeutic function is to normalize suffering. By understanding that disappointment, failure, and frustration are inherent to the human condition, the individual can move from self-blame to a more compassionate, universal perspective. B. Navigating life's twists. Open When Doctor. Julie Smith's work, including Open When, provides a supportive framework for navigating specific, common emotional crises. This book format reinforces the idea that emotional literacy is a skill that can be accessed and deployed as needed. The toolkit approach. This method supports the idea that the brain requires an active toolkit of strategies, e.g., grounding techniques, cognitive reframing, emotional validation, to deploy in high-stress moments, helping to bridge the gap between abstract psychological knowledge and immediate practical application. C. Overcoming mind problems. How to be happy. The pursuit of happiness, explored by thinkers like C.J. Juss in How to Be Happy, often circles back to the mastery of the mind's tendency toward negativity and desire. Internal locus of control. Happiness is framed not as an external reward, but as an internal skill derived from overcoming cognitive distortions, understanding the transient nature of emotions, and cultivating an internal locus of control over one's reactions, a concept crucial for the broader psychology of well-being. The future of mental health, integration and personalization. The comprehensive view offered by this body of work demands a personalized and integrated approach to mental health that moves beyond the historical one-size-fits-all. Modeled A, the interconnectedness of discipline's future progress depends on the seamless integration of neuroscience and metabolism, understanding the brain's physical and energetic needs, the balanced brain. Trauma-informed care, recognizing that what happened to you is often more important than what is wrong with you. The body keeps the score. Societal and cultural critique, addressing the environmental stressors that create widespread distress, lost connections. The anxious generation, practical skill building, teaching concrete techniques for emotional regulation and resilience, emotional first aid, 10-minute toughness. B. The ethical and diagnostic challenge while the field grows. Ethical boundaries and diagnostic clarity remain essential. The existence of works like John Ronson's The Psychopath Test serves as a cultural reminder of the complexity and sometimes flawed nature of diagnostic classification, especially when dealing with severe personality traits. Similarly, foundational texts like Chad Ripperger's Introduction to the Science of Mental Health emphasize the necessity of rigorous, scientific inquiry to ensure that therapeutic models are evidence-based and effective. The Research Handbook of Academic Mental Health indicates a growing focus on the specific stressors and systemic issues within high-pressure learning environments, demonstrating a critical need for context-specific mental health interventions rather than generic solutions. Conclusion: the self-authoring path to psychological quality, the journey through the modern landscape of mental health, reveals that psychological quality is not a destination of perfection, but a dynamic, practiced skill set. It is about the courage to look inward, self-acceptance, the strength to draw boundaries, integrity, the discipline to manage the energy of stress, cycle completion, and the wisdom to engage with the world's inherent complexities, growth mindset. From the deep, embodied healing of trauma to the everyday practice of intentional emotional first aid, the work of well-being is a self-authoring process. As Daniel Howells, you will get through this night, and countless therapeutic narratives affirm, healing is not a linear path, but a process of navigating dark moments with the knowledge that resilience is built through vulnerability, connection, and the persistent commitment to a life of meaning. The ultimate therapeutic journey is the realization that we are fundamentally competent to cope and profoundly worthy of happiness. Lori Gottlieb's memoir turned psychological exploration. Maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist. Her Therapist and Our Lives Revealed offers a rare, dual perspective view into the therapeutic process. By chronicling her own experience as a patient while simultaneously sharing her work as a clinician, Gottlieb humanizes the often mystified world of therapy, establishing it not as a realm for the sick, but as an essential practice for self-inquiry, confronting existential concerns and revising the narratives that define and often confine us. This section explores the key psychological principles and clinical insights illuminated by her work. The process of unveiling. Narratives, blind spots, and self-deception. The central challenge in therapy, as Gottlieb illustrates, is not the problem itself, but the story we tell ourselves about the problem. Most people enter therapy holding a fixed, often heavily edited personal narrative that justifies their current distress or situation. The power of the chief. Complaint versus the core. Conflict clients arrive with a chief complaint, the surface-level issue they believe must be fixed. My partner is impossible. My job is too stressful, or I am unlucky in love. Gottlieb demonstrates that the therapist's work is to gently peel back these layers to expose the core conflict, the pattern, fear, or self-sabotaging behavior that lives beneath. Revisionist history. The human mind excels at constructing narratives that protect the ego. We are all, in a sense, unreliable narrators of our own lives. The therapeutic relationship provides the safe, objective space where these historical revisions can be questioned. The therapist, acting as an empathetic outsider, helps the client see their blind spots, the truths about themselves they refuse to acknowledge because the emotional cost of awareness is too high. The unconscious contract. Often, clients are unknowingly operating under an unconscious contract with themselves or their past. For example, a person who fears success might be adhering to an old, unconscious promise not to outshine a struggling parent. Therapy makes this contract conscious, allowing the client to renegotiate the terms of their own life. Confronting existential concerns in the clinical setting. Gottlieb's exploration often touches upon deep existential concerns, making her work relevant to approaches like existential concerns and cognitive behavioral procedures, an integrative approach to mental health. 4 core existential givens are perpetually present in the therapy room. Death, finitude, the awareness that life is finite, which fuels the anxiety of wasting time or making the wrong choices. Freedom, responsibility, the profound, sometimes terrifying, realization that we are fundamentally free to choose, and thus, entirely responsible for our choices and the meaning we create. Isolation, aloneness, the understanding that there is an ultimate gap between oneself and others, which can be mitigated but never fully closed. Meaninglessness, the recognition that the universe has no inherent meaning, requiring the individual to create their own. Therapy in this context is a process of facing these inevitable truths without collapsing into anxiety, moving from why me to what now. The Therapeutic Alliance, a laboratory for life. The relationship between the therapist and the patient, the Therapeutic Alliance, is not merely a forum for conversation. It is the primary engine of change. It acts as a controlled, Safe laboratory where the client's destructive relational patterns are inevitably replayed, analyzed, and ultimately repaired. A. Transference and countertransference. This is the core psychoanalytic concept where the patient unconsciously redirects feelings, attitudes, and desires from a significant past figure, often a parent, onto the therapist. If a patient habitually seeks approval from their therapist, they are likely reenacting an attempt to finally gain the validation they lacked in childhood. Gottlieb illustrates how the therapist must recognize and manage transference to interpret it constructively, helping the patient see that they are responding to a ghost from the past, not the person sitting across from them. Countertransference. The therapist is also a human being with their own history. Countertransference is the therapist's emotional reaction to the client, often rooted in the therapist's own unresolved issues. Gottlieb's honesty about her own feelings towards her clients and her own therapist emphasizes that therapy is a two-way, dynamic street. The effective therapist must undergo their own extensive personal work, as Gottlieb does, to ensure their reactions serve the client's healing, not their own ego or needs. B. Radical honesty and corrective emotional experience. The therapeutic relationship is unique because it demands a level of radical honesty and intimacy that is often absent in the client's real-world relationships. The container of safety. This safety allows for corrective emotional experience, CEE. If a client fears confrontation, they may confront the therapist or feel anger toward them and discover, contrary to their childhood experiences, that the relationship does not break. They learn that their authentic, difficult emotions are tolerable and that their relationships can withstand them. This CEE is then internalized and generalized to their life outside the consulting room. 3. The therapist's humanity, shattering the mask of sanity. By revealing her own personal crisis and decision to seek therapy, Gottlieb actively demolishes the psychological distance between the healer and the wounded. This insight is a profound counterpoint to older concepts like Hervey M. Cleckley's The Mask of Sanity, which focused on the pathology of those who expertly hide their true disordered selves. Gottlieb shows that the mask we all wear is not one of sanity versus insanity, but one of having it together versus being a struggling human. A. The vulnerability of the practitioner, the necessity for therapists to seek their own treatment, highlights a key professional and ethical reality explored in works like clinical decision making in mental health practice, burnout prevention. Dealing with human suffering is emotionally taxing. Managing your mind, as explored in texts like Gillian Butler's work, is crucial for clinicians. The therapist must maintain emotional regulation to provide a consistent, non-anxious presence for the client. Empathy versus projection. A therapist who hasn't explored their own deep vulnerabilities risks projecting their issues onto the client. Gottlieb's personal work ensures that her empathy is genuine and clinical, not an extension of her own personal needs or fears. B. A corrective to popular myths. Gottlieb's approach subtly corrects many of the 50 great myths of popular psychology. It challenges the idea that mental illness is solely a sign of weakness or a complete break from reality. Truth, distress is a universal experience, and many highly functioning individuals need help navigating complexity. Myth. Therapy is about getting advice. Truth. Therapy is about facilitating self-discovery and helping the client find the answers they already possess. Phi. The universal pursuit of connection and happiness. Ultimately, the core of Gottlieb's work reveals that most distress is rooted in a fundamental human need for connection, meaning, and love, echoing themes in the psychology of happiness, the search for belonging. In the end, every client, regardless of their presenting complaint, grief, anger, anxiety, is searching for a way to connect more authentically to others and to themselves. Therapy teaches the skills of vulnerability, emotional regulation, and self-compassion that make healthy connection possible. Defining happy enough. The therapeutic journey often involves relinquishing the fantasy of a perfectly happy, problem-free life and accepting the messy reality of human existence. The goal shifts from an idealized, unattainable happiness to a state of good enough, a life characterized by meaningful engagement, deep relationships, and the resilience to weather inevitable storms. This practical, grounded definition is key to achieving genuine personal growth. V. Application in Personal Growth. Gottlieb's book serves as a powerful call to action for personal growth, making the case that self-inquiry is not a luxury, but a necessity for living consciously. The cost of avoidance. Her narratives demonstrate that the pain of avoiding a problem is almost always greater than the pain of facing it. The anxiety, resentment, or depression that leads someone to therapy is often a direct result of avoiding difficult truths or necessary confrontations. Legacy and time. The awareness of time and the desire to live a life that aligns with one's values, a key existential concern, is the great motivator. Therapy, by clarifying values and dismantling fear-based patterns, accelerates the process of living fully